Hey everyone, this is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Happy Saturday, everybody. It's not often that we do episodes on Saturdays, but since we are in the home stretch of our Kickstarter campaign with just about 15 days left to go, we are going to be throwing in some extra episodes on the weekends to rally support for the Kickstarter and give you guys some bonus content as a thank you here at the end of the year. Today, we're going to be looking at the meaning of the moon in Gemini as a part of our Planets in Profile series. You can check out, by the way, some of the evergreen content that we have on this series is really great. So you go back and you can see Mercury through the signs, Venus through the signs, Mars through the signs, and now the moon through the signs. So far we've done Aries and Taurus and now Gemini, and Kaylee Haynes will also be with us today doing moon poetry at the end. So be sure to stick around and watch her spoken word poetry on the kind of archetypal, it's like archetypal moon poetry, and it's really beautiful. So I hope you'll stick around and check that out. Anyway, so today we're going to be looking at the moon in Gemini and the archetypal meaning of that placement. If you have it in your natal chart or you know people with it, it'll certainly help you to take a look at this episode. And regardless of if you're just a student of astrology too, it's great to have deeper, kind of just a deeper take on each of the planets through all of the signs. They're so beautiful in how they express themselves in each of the individual signs of the zodiac. I've got my shirt on because today the Vikings are playing on a Saturday, and it's rare that that happens. They're going to end up having sports games on every day of the week. I swear to God. And I'm not sure I like that, but anyway, I digress. So that's our agenda for today. I hope you will enjoy the episode. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share your comments and reflections. We'd love to hear from you. You can find transcripts of any of my daily talks, including today's, on the website nightlightastrology.com. As you guys know, we are trying to get to 1,777 backers by New Year's Eve. So far, as of the time I'm recording this, we have 579. Thank you so much to everybody who has pitched in already. We have just about 15 days left to go, a little over 2 weeks before New Year's Day. New Year's Eve is really sort of the last hurrah, but I think it technically runs until like 9 in the morning on New Year's Day. Anyway, it's New Year's Eve, and we're trying to get there. We still need 1,198 backers. We need to make a huge push here at the end to get there. I believe we can do it. I still believe that we can have a big turnout here in the last 2 weeks and rally the support that we need to reach our goals and create all of the interesting stretch goal projects that we have. The big one being the establishment of a donation-based reading clinic or an affordable reading service. And some of the other goals are really supporting in those. In fact, we have to build out the website to make sure that we can host that, for example. So there's stuff like that we'll be using funds toward if we move beyond our base funding goal. In order to do that, we really need to get to 1,777 backers. That's why that number exists. So anyway, you guys know you can find the link to the Kickstarter pinned to the top of the comments section in today's video or in the description of the video, or you can go to the website, nightlightastrology.com, and click on the 2024 Kickstarter tab. Today, I got a really nice question from someone in one of the live streams that I didn't have a chance to answer, and I thought I would go back and answer it as a part of my little Get to Know You series that I've been doing as a way of promoting the Kickstarter. So they asked me, like, you've been making content 5 days a week or more, because way back in the day, I made it 300 plus days a year. Now it's 5 days a week year round. It's a little bit less than 300, but they said, what are the, how do you stay consistent doing content that regularly for this many years? Like, are there any secrets, or do you have any philosophy that you use to kind of keep you so consistent with creating something? And, you know, on one level, it's kind of like, well, it's just like any other job. How does anyone go to work 5 days a week for 10 years? You know, I don't think it's that remarkable on one level, because it's just a job like any other job. Creating content is something I have to show up for just as surely as all of you go to work every day, 5 days a week, you know? So on that level, I don't think it's anything extraordinary, but making content and publishing it on time and having something new to say and having your heart in it and finding new ways of making content and building an audience and all of that and doing so consistently over a long period of time. I do have some philosophies that I deeply believe in. And so I want to tell you about those today as a way of continuing to get to know me and the channel. So the 3 philosophies that keep me consistent, that are really the reason why we've done 10 annual Kickstarters at this point. Number 1 on my list is that the body needs rhythm. I would say that I actually kind of sucked at this at the beginning, and if I wouldn't have learned this, I'm not sure I would have lasted this long. But sometime in what I started recognizing is that, you know, sitting at a desk, researching, writing, recording, the 3 to 4 hour process that I have had for 10 years, 5 days a week, that process, well, it's sort of like I don't know, it's kind of like it's like my own little ashram in my office, where I do all of this. And so there's something very spiritual and meditative about the process, but your body has to support all of that. And so the body needs rhythm. Like I'm not like the world's specimen of health, right? Like I do things that aren't so great for me. But in terms of sleep, generally speaking, I'm really good at getting enough sleep. Generally speaking, I'm very good at staying hydrated. And generally speaking, I do work out 5 days a week and have for years now. Working out 5 days a week has looked different and I've had different goals and it's changed. And also, like, just nutritionally speaking, I'm not again, like, there are people far healthier than me. But generally speaking, I have, I've worked with a nutrition coach over the years who's taught me better habits for taking care of my body and the kind of macro ratio that's good for my body type and stuff like that. So I'm not saying I don't want to be prescriptive about anything, and I certainly don't judge anyone for wherever they're at. But one of my secrets to staying consistent in content creation over the years is, like, I got to take care of my body. So as consistently as I am with the 3 to 4 hours a day of content creation, as consistently as I'm doing that, really, I would say, and I don't even know if it's a secret to success or it's just like a secret to sanity, really. But for me, it's like there has to be some rhythms with my body: exercise, sleep, water, and a reasonable nutrition. Like, I'm not, again, like, I'm not trying to say I'm like like the I don't know, the avatar of health or anything, okay, guys? But that's a big part of what I think enables me to do this, is trying to stay in a rhythm with my bodily needs and health. Number two is that the heart needs food. And this might even be more important, I don't know. But the heart needing food means I got to spend time with my wife. I got to spend time with friends. I got to spend time more and more recently being creative, which is something I like. The content creation is super creative for me, but I'm talking about, like, playing my guitar, singing music with people, singing music with friends, playing music with friends, going out to concerts, going to see interesting movies, or going to a museum, or going and doing fun things with the kids. If I don't do things that make my heart feel good, I don't have anything to give to the content. And it's actually a kind of habit that I have to have for the content creation to work 5 days a week, 10 years in a row. That's the truth. Like, if I don't do things that are fun, that fill my heart with love and connection to other human beings and things that I love and creative activities that I love, the content suffers and I start to drag. So one of my philosophies over the year that keeps me consistent is to make sure when I'm not doing this, that I'm doing things that fill my heart cup up. And number three is that my mind needs interesting ideas. Half of the content that I create comes from interesting things that I consume in reading, or watching an interesting movie, or seeing an interesting documentary, or talking to interesting people, or going to an interesting talk, or reading interesting spiritual texts, having interesting conversations with my wife, being in therapy. I have to stimulate my mind regularly. I have to be learning. For me, is not about accumulation of, like, information. Learning for me is about, it's kind of like, are you someone who likes to go to a thrift store and find treasures? Are you someone who likes to go to a used bookstore and wander around until you find something you love? That's me with ideas. I constantly go rummaging around places looking for interesting ideas. And then when I find them, I like to play with them and think about them, and I have fun with them, and they really get me going. And then that inspires the content. So my three philosophies: my body needs care regularly, just as regularly as the content. My heart, I don't have to be perfect, but I do have to care for it. My heart needs food regularly, or the content suffers. And my mind needs interesting ideas, or the content suffers. So anyways, those are some of my philosophies. It is a joy and a pleasure to make this content for you guys. I promise to keep getting better at it, promise to keep these practices up, and so that you have a reliable place of spiritual astrological content to turn to for your daily life. In the meantime, if you value that and you don't mind pitching in to support the continuation of this work, we would really appreciate it. You can find the link pinned to the top of the comment section or in the description of this video. Help us get to 1,777 backers and enjoy today's moon exploration of the moon in Gemini. Bye. All right, today we are taking a look again at the moon in Gemini as a part of our Planets in Profile series. So far, we've taken a look at the moon in Aries and Taurus. We're going in zodiacal order. And as always, Kaylee will be with us today to offer some amazing spoken word poetry and kind of add her artistic take on the moon's flavor in Gemini. We're so thankful that she's been a part of this series. It's been a really fun way to kind of illustrate and draw out the archetype in art. And yeah, anyway, I hope you guys have been enjoying the series. And so let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to put my presentation up on the screen talking about the moon in Gemini. And we're going to follow some of the same setup that we have in the previous portions of this series. Remember that we start off with this idea that if in order to understand any planet in any sign, we have to start by understanding the nature of the planet first. So what is the moon all about? Well, the moon's universal significations are always going to be those that represent the planet in the broadest philosophical sense, or the underlying philosophical meaning of the planet, which then has a kind of archetypal tapestry of images associated with it, and many topical significations that come out of the universal or that are reflective of the universal. There's universals and particulars. On the universal level, the moon represents the realm of fortune, which is the daily flow of events and the constant changing of our environment, mood, mind, emotions, body, and the constant fluctuation of circumstances, which is why if you're an astrologer, one of the things you can do to learn astrology really quickly is to keep a moon journal. Pay attention to the aspects the moon is making day in and day out, and you will notice a correspondence between the archetypal themes that are rising up or showing themselves, and that's the moon. Now, by contrast, the topical significations of any planet are going to be those that represent the most specific and concrete people, places, or things that are themselves reflections of the universal. So on the topical level, the moon represents the body because the world is an embodied place. The world is the dance and orchestration of the universal archetypes. And so the moon represents the material world, including the body, and including the personified the material world is personified in the role of the mother, which is an archetype, not a sex or gender, although obviously it's connected with women too. Home and family as well, because these are some of the basic defining features of life, is that, you know, we move in tribes, families, cultures, clans, villages, and groups of people, including the population of voters in an election, where the elected official might be the sun, but the voters in the city, the people, will be the moon. The moon can also represent marriage, as it is the moon reflects the light of the sun, and so there's a kind of implied dance between the sun and the moon that the moon itself brings through the reflective light that it carries. And on that level, the moon is associated with the alchemical marriage between the moon and the sun. And so it's also representative of marriage and, the union of lovers and things like that. Pregnancy, of course, comes out of that as well, and childbirth. But also anything that we nurture or devote ourselves to in relationships through time and with change implied. Those kind of nurturing relational biomatrix that we find ourselves in and participating through is the moon. And things like food and cooking, really specific individual things like the tides and water and certain animals were associated with the moon traditionally. But some of that is really about correspondences that are not just, a part of some list, but have to do with our symbolic eye and being able to note things that are moon-like. The significations of the moon are then modified according to the sign that the moon is traveling through at any given time, or at the time of birth as the natal signature of your moon sign. So, and this is really the language of essential dignities. The meaning of a sign is going to be most primarily related to its host or hosts if it has both a domicile and exaltation ruler. And then secondarily by the various qualities of the sign, for example, double-bodied, airy, masculine, summer, autumn, and so forth. its mode, its element, its gender, and also like the time of year that it comes at. Those are things that can have a role in characterizing the way that a planet in that sign will behave or express itself. The moon in Gemini can thus be understood according to the following features. So Gemini is the masculine temple of Mercury. Mercury has two temples, one masculine, one feminine, the feminine being Virgo. It is a double-bodied yang air sign, which means that we have, masculine, you call it masculine, but really what we're talking about is metaphysical and does not have to be linked in any literal sense to sex or gender categories, which for Gemini anywhere, and Mercury, I should say, are quite fluid anyway. Mercury is a planet that was considered like neuter, or a planet that really wasn't identified with a sex or an energetic sex category like yang or yin, but could move fluidly between them and would often change from one to the other, depending on its relation with the sun, evening star, morning star, its place in its synodic cycle with the sun, and so forth. This is a double-bodied sign, which means it's of two natures at the same time, the light rising and the light turning. If you look at the sun in the sky around the Gemini time of year in the northern hemisphere, for example, you'll see that there's a turn that's happening. It's hard to perceive unless you use an astronomy program, because you're not sitting out there observing it every day. But if you use an astronomy program, it's like the sun is rising up and then it starts turning to come back down by the end of Gemini. So this rising and turning to come back down was associated with the double-bodied nature of the sign. It is also yang, which means is associated with that kind of centrifugal force, energy moving outward, as opposed to a feminine quality in yin, which is more about drawing things inward. Both, of course, are also quite fluid for Mercury anyway. So yeah, it's funny because it's sort of like saying you have a way in which this gender shape-shifting planet can act more masculine or more feminine, but even when it does so, it's still very shifty and movement-oriented between the opposites of any kind. Anyway, it's the sign of the twins. So you think of the mythology of Castor and Pollux and many other twin myths all around the planet that could be applied to understand the broader archetype. And the third zodiacal sign of spring from the symbolic standpoint of the Northern Hemisphere. It doesn't have to be taken literally. It's not a causal system. It's a hermetic system of correspondences, which means it's symbolic. There's a logos to it, astrologia, which means the study or science or rationale of the stars. But the word astro coming from aster, which is the word for star. But then the basic idea here is that it's a symbolic language of correspondences, which no planet loves more than Mercury Hermes, who the science was said to be founded by in the first place. So this kind of duality is very, very magical part of the zodiac. The duality of Gemini is reflective of the dualities of Mercury, of course. So anyway, we get this part of the year when the light is dominant, reaching its climax, and then turning backward toward darkness. And all of that happens through the sign of Gemini, which by the end commences the descent. But in the sky, again, you can see it starting to slow down and turn by the end, like last 10 degrees of Gemini. All right, anyway, so let's move on. The moon in Gemini can thus be understood as a mercurial, airy, double-bodied yang kind of moon. Very interesting for the moon. The moon behaves a bit like Mercury, the masculine, airy Mercury. So you can see these Gemini moon themes reflected in the following characters and themes. One that is classic is that it's a youthful, childlike sign. It's curious, it's playful, and it's kind of youthful. A little naive, but clever and mischievous. So not stupid, but a little naive in that, like a great image that comes to my mind would be like Mickey Mouse in Fantasia's The Sorcerer's Apprentice, right? There's a little bit of like mischievous curiosity, and it's a sign of tremendous learning, but learning through play, learning through experimentation, learning through mischief, and learning through a kind of chaos magic. People with moons in Gemini are thus people whose words and speech are sensitive, thoughtful, compassionate, and carefully crafted. People whose bodies are fast, fluid, intelligent, playful in their actions. You wouldn't believe how many really amazing athletes who are very mercurial and fluid have the moon in Gemini, or people who have incredibly thoughtful, fluid relationships with words, thoughts, and ideas. Also, people who are naturally curious about the human mind and body, people who are poetic, imaginative, but also mentally agile and, again, playful and curious, changeable, exploratory, interactive, flexible. These are the characteristics of the mind, body, and sort of the environment that the native finds their life taking place in when the moon is in Gemini. You can see the moon in Gemini reflected in the following characters and themes: the constant exploration of dualities and opposites, a dealing with shadow twins, internal or external, real or imagined. I think I'm one way, but I have to face my opposite, either in myself or in other people, that are a constant source of like mirroring in my life. Constant exploring of dualities or opposites. Fun, fluid, warm, witty, adaptable, communicative. These are the themes of moon in Gemini. Fantastic, right? When it comes to having fun with someone. Of course, one of the downsides is that it's so changeable. For the moon, it can suggest like a kind of mercurial nature that makes it hard to commit to things, or makes it hard to stick with things, or makes it hard to not explore outside of the boundaries of commitments and disciplines and practices and things like that. That's not to say that you can't have people who aren't tremendously talented because of hard work and discipline, but there's a playfulness and an exploratory, curious movement that can't be taken away. And sometimes that's frustrating for other people, or even for the Gemini moon themselves. Intellectual, inventive, magical. Sometimes like, sometimes it's like tricky, a little deceptive. But also sometimes not with any like super ill intentions or anything. Though some worse than others. Skeptical, deconstructive, analytical tend to be more of a questioner and a curious, playful interactor with ideas than like a committer to a faith or a doctrine. Mothers, life environments, or family settings that include chaos, changeability, intense dualities, exploration, lots of change in the environment. Now, here are some people that were born with the moon in Gemini that are really good examples. Now, you don't have to like any of these people, right? The point is to celebrate the archetypal qualities present in these public figures that illustrate the archetype. So again, just because I pick people doesn't mean you have to have voted for Barack Obama or whatever, right? So with Obama, one of the things that he was known for was being a particularly well-liked orator, and he had good taste in writers who wrote his speeches and so forth. So one of the things that he was pretty good at is speaking, and he was very mercurial and articulate and sort of playful and funny. Of course, some of that's probably due to being a Leo too, right? But the moon in the fifth house in his chart is very playful. He liked to play basketball and so forth. He always often appeared on ESPN picking the tournament brackets and stuff. So you have someone who had this kind of playful but also very mercurial, sensitive way of making speeches. And if you liked him, if you are a person who liked him, and you don't have to be, but if you are, you probably liked him because you liked the kind of playful, witty, well-spokenness, which is one of many features that could describe the moon in his chart, but that's a good example. How about Jennifer Lawrence, one of the most mercurial, Hermes-like actors that we have? She's so funny, she's so witty, she's so sarcastic. I recently saw a movie, Ashley and I watched a movie, and it was about her, I don't know, I can't remember what it was called, but she basically helps this kid who's kind of like a virgin and a little bit of a dork. And she sort of helps him grow up, but she helps herself grow up in the process. And her wit and her humor. And I mean, I'm thinking of Silver Linings Playbook and so many movies that she's been in where one of the features of her personality that's clearly coming through in the roles that she plays, because it's been said outside of her work that she's actually an incredibly funny, witty person. It's not just that she's playing characters like that. This resembles her character. And so that Gemini moon is just on full display with the way her sense of humor and her wit and her banter and her kind of charming, witty, sparkle in the eye quality that she has. Very moon in Gemini. Jim Carrey, same thing. Moon in Gemini. Think about what a shapeshifter is. I remember when I was a kid, there was a movie that came out, and maybe you guys have seen this, maybe you haven't. It was called The Mask. And if you're old enough, you probably remember this. But one of the things that they did was they sort of personified his weird shape-shifting face and all of his facial expressions, and they sort of animated him going through contortions that are sort of like Jim Carrey's natural contortions, but like animated. It was such a clever movie at the time, and I just remember it was Ace Ventura, and everything was like exploding, and this was in the 90s. So Jim Carrey, though, and I think I want to say one of his icons is it Jerry Lewis? Is that the comedian? I'm trying to remember his name, but very similar to him too, where he had this just kind of like, wasn't he the Nutty Professor, the original maybe? Anyway, Jim Carrey. First of all, he has a very philosophical, skeptical, analytical mind. If you listen to him later in life, he's become something of a kind of poet philosopher, and he has a lot of very interesting, I think, kind of wise things to say. I mean, just in my opinion, who knows? But the other thing that's interesting is he played Andy Kaufman in Man on the Moon and had this kind of profound shift as a result of playing a comedian who was just as mercurial as they come in Andy Kaufman. And that role was actually part of this slow progress of deconstructing his identity and looking at opposites and dualities within himself, which he's spoken about quite publicly. And that was actually that movie was called Man on the Moon. Lionel Messi, I think that's how you say his name, one of the most mercurial, agile, fluid soccer players, football players, depending on where you're at in the world, that we've ever seen. He's got Moon and Venus together in Gemini. And, of course, he's got Jupiter in Aries and Mars square Jupiter and some other things that pop in his chart for an athlete. But one of the things that is probably, look at his face. You can really feel it in his face. The playful, mercurial, sort of childlike quality. And one of the most fluid players to ever play the game. Just super mercurial on the field. So this is a great example of a moon in Gemini in the life of an athlete. Sigmund Freud. He had Moon in Gemini, co-present with Saturn. He was someone who was like one of our first hermetic magicians of psychology. There were many others, but he was one of the, on the Mount Rushmore of the depth psychology movement or tradition. His face is up there. He was very curious, he had an inquisitive nature, and he loved exploring the tensions of the opposites in the human psyche, which of course Carl Jung picked up and really elaborated upon, and included within that also included astrology, which Freud opened the door for by his exploration of the human psyche in relation to the gods. But all of this is like a probing into the unconscious. Remember that Hermes is the god who can go into Hades and guides souls down in and comes back out. And you'll see that kind of quality of exploration that Hermes can somehow get away with exploring into darker regions because of this kind of playful, innocent, curious, adaptable, almost like an innocent quality, but a sincere seeking or probing that Hermes is prone to do. So Freud is a great example of someone with a moon in Gemini who had this kind of probing, hermetic, magic quality in their work, even though you and I may have gathered more from what Carl Jung did, for example, with astrology and so forth in the modern psychological astrology than Freud, but still, they were part of the same tradition. 50 Cent, switching gears a little bit, I don't have his birth time, but one of the things that I find really amazing is that, he's Moon and Mercury both in Gemini. He's got, some planets in Cancer too that I think are interesting. Of course, there's like a Venus in Leo, but for someone who has this kind of very hermetic, fluid, shifting presence as a rapper. And one of the things that's interesting about his work is it's not super fast, but it's very, very fluid. It's kind of a gentle, rhythmic, very, very fluid quality to his lyrics. And I think that's just fascinating, given that the moon is in Gemini. This has a sort of a gentle quality to it. I mean, gentle in the like tone or the cadence or the speed. So not necessarily the message, right? But the Cancerian qualities are interesting there too to comment on. Joan Baez, who had the moon in Gemini in the 3rd house, which was also called the joy of the moon, was the ruler of the 4th house, and she was attributed with being a major player in the roots revival in American folk music. Of course, like for a person like that to have a moon in Gemini in the 3rd house makes total sense. She was on the road quite frequently as a sort of magical folk singer-songwriter. And to me, the quality of her music, its cleverness, the time period in which she was in, the youthfulness of what she was a part of especially in the, like the 60s, and the way that folk music would influence so many other rock bands. I think, for example, the Grateful Dead, who I've been into a lot lately. So this quality of singer, songwriter, traveler, like a traveling bard is kind of how I think of Joan Baez. Traveling storyteller, magic musician, moon in Gemini in the 3rd house. How about Jackie Chan? Similarly, you have this incredible fluidity of movement as an athlete, as a practitioner of martial arts. So, of course, Mercury is itself in Pisces, which is super fluid. But the moon, and it's squared to Jupiter in Gemini too, which adds a lot of pop to it. The moon in Gemini for one of the most fluid martial arts action movie stars of all time makes a lot of sense. So just kind of giving you a feel for how that moon can show up in people's lives. Franz Kafka, he had a huge stellium of planets in Gemini. He is one of the more interesting, probing, deconstruction kind of, I don't know how I would qualify him. Actually, you know what? Let's see how Wikipedia qualifies him, because I was just going to say there's something about his work that, to me, I've read a number of his things, and yeah, let's see. Yeah, this is interesting. Yeah, so he fuses elements of realism and fantasy, and he explores themes of alienation, existential anxiety, guilt, and absurdity. The term Kafkaesque has entered English to describe absurd situations. I've read The Trial and the Metamorphosis when I was in like grad school, but I just love that, like, someone who explores absurdities and interesting human dualities and paradoxes, and who has this kind of fantastic existential realism, like a fantasy, and it's kind of like existentialism meets magical realism. Very interesting. Like, if you've ever read The Metamorphosis, I won't give it away, but it's really interesting. So the magical, the skeptical, the deconstructive, the absurd, he does have Saturn and Pluto in Gemini, which probably give it a little bit of a heavier quality, the moon in Gemini. But he's a great example of a writer with the moon in Gemini. How about Sia? So it's so funny, like, my daughter is like a big Sia fan. She just loves her music, but she also, like, my daughter is an Aquarius rising, and she loves that she, like, hides her face and cuts her haircuts really. So my daughter asked recently, when we were going to get her haircut, if she could get the Sia haircut, the same haircut as Sia. So she got her haircut just like Sia. She looks super cute. Anyway, I think that's fascinating because Sia also explores, like, light and dark. She has a motif running through a lot of her work of like her and a shadow twin, and showing her face, not showing her face. Super, super, to me, Sia, especially being that she really plays with dualities in the artistic presentation of her music, it's a super moon and Gemini kind of thing to do. Rowan Atkinson, I mean, Mr. Bean, come on, right? It's like Jim Carrey again. It's like he's so fluid, his facial expressions and the kind of mercurial figures he embodies. He's like, an embodiment of sort of like the fool and the idiot, the village idiot, that kind of art, literary motif. But he's so funny and so clever and so mischievous and so knows what he's doing and then like doesn't know what he's doing. So that just one of the most playful embodiments of a moon in Gemini you could ask for. How about Stephen Colbert? Stephen Colbert, you'll see people in media who have very witty, fluid, changeable personalities and senses of humor. Again, I think Stephen Colbert is a journalist, which is also a very mercurial Gemini-like thing, who's very kind of double-bodied, changeable, clever, funny, mischievous, but also has like a kind of youthful. Look at his face; it's just kind of got like this sort of youthful theme in it. Ella Fitzgerald, similarly, just a super, super fluid musician. And I wanted to read something about her that I found really interesting. So let me just bring this up. Yeah, so she was noted for her purity of tone, impeccable diction, phrasing, timing, intonation, and horn-like improvisational ability, particularly in her scat singing. Does that not sound like the moon in Gemini? And here's this woman who has all of these very beautiful lunar qualities. Look at her face. Look at how sweet and young she looks. And that kind of is a theme that persists throughout her life, where she just retains this kind of youthful, playful quality. It was particularly notable in her voice and the way she sang and her ability to improvise, the kind of jazz singer. So fantastic example, again, of the moon in Gemini. How about George Carlin, a kind of existentialist comedian who loved exploring polarities and opposites and contradictions, and was kind of a deconstructionist type of guy, and had this sort of analytical, playful, mischievous, chaos magic quality to the way in which he did comedy. Pele, there we go. Once again, one of the most fluid mercurial soccer players of all time. Just to make a comparison to him and Lionel Messi. Lionel Messi, I think that's how you say it. Alejandro Jodorowsky. Now, we don't have his birth time, but isn't that amazing that he has the moon and Mars in Gemini, which, if you remember, Sia did as well. There's something about Jodorowsky that I really like. If you don't know him, check out his work. He's done some really interesting things with chaos magic. And his chaos magic approach is really interesting. Like, I've heard it said that like you might go and see him and he'll give you like a bizarre set of instructions, like go get a Diet Coke, empty it halfway, drink the rest, find a cave, light a candle in the cave, scatter jelly beans on the floor of the cave. Like he has these very bizarre, like magical prescriptions that he has given people over the years that he sort of like downloads. He's also, the guy who if you ever want to read like or see a movie that is like one of the most interesting, bizarre stories I've ever heard. There is a documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune, and it's actually about a movie that he wanted to do a production of Dune, and it just never got done. But because it never got done, a lot of other things did, and it's really, really an interesting story, and just another interesting figure. And I didn't know him, but he wrote for Reality Sandwich once or twice back in the day when I was writing as one of the bloggers at Reality Sandwich. He wrote some pieces for us. And a lot of it had to do with a sort of chaos magic that he is interested in. So a wonderful example of the moon in Gemini, just a kind of classic magician. Roseanne Barr, there you go. Whether you like Roseanne or not, if you think about that just kind of slick, mischievous humor, it's like, grow up, Roseanne. It's like on her show is like, who's the kid in the room? And I'm teasing, of course, but like that is the mischievous, witty, funny, changeable, crude, but somehow like she played a mom, It's a famous show. She was a mom, but she was kind of a sarcastic, bantering mother in that show. So it's a good Moon in Gemini example. And then Jet Li, same thing again as Jackie Chan, Moon in Gemini. Very, very fluid martial arts practitioner and actor again. Louis Pasteur. So here you have someone, and I thought this was interesting. Let me just read you something about. All right, so so he was a French chemist and microbiologist renowned for his discoveries of the principles of vaccination, microbial fermentation, and pasteurization, the last of which was named after him. So he really is known for being behind the like the discovery and working in and through like the realm of vaccines, which I know people have a lot of very different theories about. But he's also known as one of the fathers of germ theory of diseases, whether you believe in that or not, right? So again, don't want to polarize people into some kind of debate, but a very interesting figure. And one of the things that you'll notice about Moon and Gemini folks is occasionally the thing that really defines them is the research, the inquiry, the kind of rational inquiry into the material world. Remember, the moon is a signifier of the material world, and Hermes Mercury is often investigative. So you have Louis Pasteur, kind of a researcher into like microbiology and sort of earthly physical domain of health in the body and stuff like that. And you don't have to like him. But Barbara Walters, same thing, is the investigative journalist, though, and also a TV personality and a kind of host and commentator and all of those good things. But again, a very famous journalist, media personality, commentator, analyzer, host, talk show host, reporter, all of those different hats she wore. It helps that she has Mercury and Mars together too. It's very good quality in Libra for someone who needs to be like analytical and sharp, but gracious, diplomatic, and harmonizing in relationships with other people. But the moon is in Barbara Walters' chart is a good indicator, again, of a journalist. And then Harry Houdini, one of the most famous magicians of all time, moon in Gemini. So this double-bodied mercurial sign is really quite magical and presents itself in so many ways. Of course, Houdini was a great escape artist, but also just one of the greatest magicians in like, modern history. So, or well known anyway. These examples all get at the heart of the moon in Gemini, and I hope that more than anything that you have a feeling for it. It's really important with moon signs to develop a feeling for the archetype rather than some kind of purely analytical take on it. And that's why we also asked Kaylee to show up at the end and grace us with some of her poetry, getting into the heart of the goddess through the signs. So without further ado, I will hand it over to her. And thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you will enjoy what she has to add to the conversation today as well.
Hello, hello. It's me, Kaylee, also known as Artemis Moonchild on Instagram. And I am back to share with you my poetry for the Gemini moon this week. This is my jam because I am a Gemini girly myself. I have my Sun and Mercury conjunct in Gemini, as well as Venus and Jupiter conjunct in Gemini. So I am here for it. It was a little different this week because so much of my poetry already leans so Gemini, and I also have a tendency to date Gemini moon men. So I really tried not to be biased. But I do have two poems that I'd love to share with you that I think capture the fun and duality and kind of mind fuckery that can be a Gemini. I can say that because I'm a Gemini. I will share my poetry with you now, since that's what I'm here to do. The first poem is called Mysterious Machine. Mysterious machine, you are computing and calculating. You are fulfilling your role and you're doing it efficiently. You are delivering information and checking off tasks. So it feels wrong for me to ask that you pause for a moment, that you turn off the motor, that you engage with me at a pace just a little slower, that you absorb this moment instead of simply recording it. You see, I'm a little low on love and I know you've been hoarding it. I'd like to fly where you are, but my plane isn't boarding yet. I could be one of your crew without the authorities reporting it. All I need is your approval. And I know you've been sorting through the paperwork, but this is hard work, this heart work, and I'm not here to hang like artwork. I'm like a garden. There is yard work involved, but if you tend me, I will pay you back tenfold. And unlike fast food, this will never get old and it will always be growing. But there's no point in sowing the seeds if you don't want to fend off the weeds. So just leave me be if you don't see gardening in your near future. That's about dating a Gemini moon man. Just my personal lived experience. Okay. This is the second poem. It's called Scared Eyes. She's got scared eyes. She's got wild nights piled up in her past like she's banking on them for better times. She's got better rhymes, but every time she tries them, that voice in her head chimes in like, keep that inside you. She's got a glare that'll blind you. She's got moves that'll remind you why you loved her in the first place. She's got first, second, and third place wrapped around her finger. She hates to linger, always on the move, always trying to prove she's better than she thinks she is. She's got that showbiz smile, but stick around for a while and watch it fade to gray. She's got a pit in her stomach that never quite goes away, and a fear that stalks her in and out of every day. She's got tomorrow figured out, but she's lost today. She's got tomorrow figured out, but she's lost today. Thank you so much once again, Adam, and all the crew at Nightlight Astrology for having me on. This has really filled my little Gemini soul cup doing these poems with and for you. I can't wait to see you next time. Bye.